Before we begin this thrilling and engaging radio broadcast, we have a small request. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the Voicecast for more captivating broadcasts like this one. And while you're here, tell us in the comments, what are you doing right now? Where are you from? And what time are you watching this? We'd love to hear from you. Now get comfortable, relax, and prepare yourself as we dive into tonight's chilling journey. Let's begin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a test. I repeat, this is not a test. This is an emergency broadcast from the Clearwater Emergency Response Authority. We are currently receiving reports of a rapidly escalating crisis at Clearwater Beach. An unknown outbreak has emerged along the coastal area, posing an immediate and severe threat to public safety. All residents and visitors in the vicinity are advised to remain indoors, secure all entry points, and await further instructions. The infected are considered highly dangerous and extremely unpredictable. What we're witnessing is unlike anything ever recorded. Our once peaceful shores, bustling with families, friends, and the laughter of children, are now engulfed in chaos. Clearwater Beach, a beloved destination, has turned into a place of fear. Stay with us as we continue to gather details on this unfolding tragedy. Just hours ago, Clearwater Beach was a picture-perfect escape. Golden sands, turquoise waves, and the scent of salt water in the breeze. Now, it's a scene of unimaginable horror. Witnesses describe the once calm shoreline as a battlefield. Beach chairs lie overturned, picnic blankets abandoned, and the ocean's soothing rhythm is drowned out by screams and the stampede of desperate feet. Authorities believe the chaos began when several beachgoers collapsed without warning. Attempts to assist them turned violent as the afflicted individuals reportedly displayed erratic, aggressive behavior. Local lifeguards and emergency responders were among the first to intervene, but within moments, they too were overwhelmed. This is no ordinary illness. For those just tuning in, the outbreak appears to spread through physical contact, specifically bites and scratches inflicted by the infected. If you are near the area, leave immediately. If escape is not possible, lock your doors and barricade yourself. Do not engage with the infected under any circumstances. Among the first heroes to respond was Jake Olson, a seasoned lifeguard known for his courage and quick thinking. Witnesses say Jake rushed into the water to assist what appeared to be a struggling swimmer, but as he approached, the swimmer turned, eyes glazed, skin pale, movements unnaturally jerky, and lunged at him. Jake's colleagues on the shore watched in horror as he was pulled under the waves. When he resurfaced, his movements were unsteady, his shouts for help replaced with guttural groans. It became clear he wasn't Jake anymore. The infection had taken him, and within minutes, others fell victim to his attack. What began as an act of bravery became the catalyst for the chaos that now grips the beach. This story is not just about the outbreak. It's about the lives it has already claimed and the bravery of those who stood their ground, only to fall. Stay tuned for updates as we uncover more details about this devastating event. This tragedy didn't begin with the chaos at Clearwater Beach. No, the roots of this disaster lie further back, in a mystery buried beneath the waves. It began weeks ago with a distress signal from an unidentified vessel drifting just off the coast. The ship was found shattered on the rocks near Point Isabel. It wasn't listed on any maritime logs, its origins unknown. As rescuers approached, they discovered barrels leaking an unusual viscous chemical into the water. Initial reports suggested it was a toxic spill, a tragic accident, but no one could have foreseen what was to come. Instead of taking immediate action, authorities delayed. They labeled it environmental contamination and assured the public that the spill was contained. But within days, fishermen reported eerie changes, schools of fish swimming in erratic, frantic patterns, massive die-offs along the coastline. Even seagulls, once harmless scavengers, began to attack anything they deemed a threat. These warnings went unheeded. The spill wasn't contained, it was spreading, and with it, the seeds of something far more dangerous. A silent storm was brewing, one that would soon erupt with devastating force. Why did the shipwreck happen? What was it carrying? These questions remain unanswered, but one thing is clear. The ocean has turned against us and we are woefully unprepared. And yet the signs were there. Warnings clear as day for anyone willing to see. But no one acted until it was too late. The first signs of trouble appeared in the water. Clearwater Beach, a sanctuary for tourists and locals alike, became a harbinger of doom. Fishermen spoke of nets filled with lifeless fish, their scales covered in strange iridescent blotches. Marine biologists noted unusual behaviors in dolphins and turtles, erratic swimming patterns, inexplicable aggression, but the warnings were dismissed, labeled as anomalies, rare occurrences in an otherwise normal ecosystem. And then the shoreline began to change. Dead fish, crabs, and even small sharks washed up in droves. Their carcasses emitted a pungent stench, a mix of decay, and something unnatural. Beachgoers reported skin irritation and dizziness after swimming. Yet the beaches remained open. Officials assured the public it was safe. Safe! That word haunts us now. What unfolded next proved that we were anything but safe. Wildlife along the coast began to attack indiscriminately. Seagulls, once content to scavenge scraps, turned into dive-bombing aggressors. Stray dogs became rabid, their eyes wild with fear. Or something worse. These weren't random events, they were warnings. Warnings we failed to heed. And when the first humans showed signs of sickness, fevers, uncontrolled aggression, it was already too late. What began as a silent threat beneath the waves had now emerged, ready to consume everything in its path. This was only the beginning. Stay tuned, because what followed was a transformation of paradise into pure chaos. And it all began with one bite. Just a few hours ago, Clearwater Beach was bustling with vacationers and locals alike, enjoying the warm sun and the rhythmic crash of waves. But things took a dark turn without warning. What seemed like a few isolated incidents of beachgoers complaining of flu-like symptoms quickly spiraled into something far worse. At first, it was subtle, just the usual grumbling about stomach aches and headaches. Then it grew worse. People were suddenly gripped by violent fever, their faces flushed a deep shade of red. The sounds of laughter and chatter started to falter, replaced by a growing unease, as more and more individuals succumbed to what could only be described as a strange and violent sickness. The doctors who arrived on the scene were baffled, unable to pinpoint the cause. What came next, however, would be far more horrifying. Victims began to exhibit disturbing changes. Their bodies, weakened by fever, seemed to lose all sensitivity to pain. They tore at their own skin, clawing at their flesh, as though driven by an insatiable hunger. Then something worse happened. One man, once a friendly face in the crowd, turned on his friends. His teeth sank into the arm of a nearby woman, and her scream rang out as she collapsed. It was the first bite. That was all it took. The infection spread quickly after that. Those who were bitten or scratched immediately began showing similar symptoms. The air was thick with panic as infected beachgoers began attacking anyone they could reach. A child, her face twisted in an unrecognizable grimace, lunged at her own mother, who screamed in terror, trying to protect herself. People scrambled for safety, but the infection spread faster than anyone could react. The panic was contagious, and it was spreading like wildfire. People fought to get off the beach, pushing and shoving in their desperation, but it didn't matter where they ran. This disease had no boundaries. It took only a few minutes before Clearwater Beach, once a place of joy, became a scene of chaos, a living nightmare where the infected were outnumbering the survivors. Those first victims didn't stand a chance. But what was most terrifying? They weren't the last. The response came swiftly, but far too late. By the time the authorities realized the severity of the situation, the beach was already lost. Military trucks and National Guard units rushed into Clearwater, attempting to erect barricades and isolate the area. The initial plan was simple: cut off the beach from the rest of the world, prevent anyone from leaving and spreading whatever this sickness was. But the infected were already too far out of control. Soldiers were quick to set up roadblocks and secure the nearby bridges, but within hours, the barricades were breached. What was intended to be a secure quarantine turned into a frantic, uncoordinated scramble. The National Guard soldiers, equipped with the latest gear and weaponry, were outnumbered by the growing horde of infected. A unit stationed at one of the bridges reported seeing the infected charge them in waves, clawing and screaming, showing no fear of the weapons that were pointed at them. Desperate to contain the situation, the military attempted to set up a perimeter around the beach. But the infected, now more aggressive than ever, didn't stop at the beach. They moved inland, breaking through whatever lines of defense were hastily thrown up in place. And the moment they did, it was as if the gates to hell had been opened. Within hours, the first reports of infections from neighboring areas began flooding in. A woman in a nearby town began to exhibit the same symptoms as the beachgoers: violent, feverish, and uncontrollable. She had never even set foot on the sand, but somehow she had contracted the illness. No one understood why or how, but it became painfully clear that this wasn't a localized issue anymore. As the infected grew in number, the authorities' ability to maintain control collapsed. By the time the National Guard started mobilizing additional forces, it was already too late. People from Clearwater Beach, some of whom had managed to escape, were now turning on the very towns they had fled to. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and a chain reaction had begun. The quarantine had failed. The walls were closing in faster than anyone could react, and those who thought they were safe had begun to realize that the disease was far from contained. It had slipped through their fingers, spreading like wildfire, and the very systems put in place to protect them had crumbled in the face of overwhelming chaos. Now, the question wasn't just how to stop the outbreak, it was how to survive it. This is not a drill. If you're hearing my voice right now, you're already too late to avoid the chaos. Clearwater Beach has descended into madness. The idyllic shores, once a place of relaxation and sunbathing, are now a battleground. Survivors are barricaded inside hotels, beachfront cafes, and even the lifeguard towers, trapped and disparate, waiting for any hope of rescue. The infection is spreading faster than we can track. Supplies are running dangerously low, and morale is even lower. Water? Gone. Food? Almost finished. What's worse, the infected are getting smarter, quicker. I wish I could say things are improving, but the situation is worsening with every passing hour. Outside, the air is thick with tension. The sound of screams echo through the stillness, drowned out by the relentless waves crashing against the shore. It's hard to tell if it's a cry for help or the death rattle of another victim, but either way, it's haunting. If you're listening and you're close enough, stay inside, stay hidden, and for God's sake, lock your doors. The survivors left are more than just scared. They're becoming animals themselves. There are whispers of alliances forming between strangers, but just as quickly, those alliances break down. People are turning on each other as the madness seeps in. The infected are relentless, but human fear, that might be even more dangerous. And if you think there's hope, think again. The National Guard arrived too late, and now they're just another layer in the chaos. Bridges are barricaded, but the infected? They're already flooding the streets, gnashing their teeth at anything that moves. There's no escape for most of us, unless we can find a way to fight back or make it to the marina. We don't know how much longer we can last. So we turn to each other. Those who can still fight are doing what they can to keep this small pocket of life alive. But how much longer before the beach is nothing more than a graveyard? We can only hope that help arrives soon, before we become part of the sea of bodies that already wash up on the shore. In the midst of all this chaos, there's one man who has become a beacon of hope for the survivors, a man who never asked to be a leader, but has stepped up out of sheer necessity. His name is Jake, former Marine, lifeguard. He wasn't supposed to be in charge, but in a world like this, titles don't matter. Jake had been working at Clearwater Beach for years, watching over swimmers and vacationers, but this was unlike anything he had ever seen. When the outbreak hit, he knew the beach better than anyone else. And in a time when people need guidance, someone who knows the terrain, who understands what it takes to survive, becomes invaluable. He didn't ask for the position. Hell, he didn't even want it. But when people started looking to him for direction, when they were faced with impossible choices, Jake made the tough calls. He organized the survivors into groups, rationing food, securing shelter, and most importantly, keeping everyone focused. The man who used to watch over others now found himself watching over a group of strangers, none of whom knew what would happen next. He's not a natural-born leader, far from it. But survival isn't about being a hero. It's about making choices, no matter how ugly, to keep the ones you care about alive. And Jake, he's learned that quickly. His past as a Marine is the only thing keeping him steady. And right now, that's enough. But with every passing hour, the pressure builds. Jake knows he can't keep this up forever. Every decision, every moment spent leading, feels like a weight he can't lift. And the infected are growing stronger. Can he keep everyone safe long enough to escape? Or will he be the first to fall when the tide turns? While Jake keeps the survivors alive, there's another person in this fight who's driven by a different kind of determination. Anna, a marine biologist, here on vacation. When the outbreak began, she never thought she'd be part of this kind of survival nightmare. But now she's focused on something crucial, understanding the origin of the infection and, more importantly, how to stop it. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Anna quickly realized that the infection wasn't random. It was tied to something much bigger. The chemical spill from the wrecked ship off the coast, the strange behaviors in marine life, it all pointed to one thing. Whatever was in those barrels didn't just affect fish, it was mutating humans too. As the infection spread through the beachgoers, Anna's mind raced. She had been studying the marine life, affected by the chemical spill, and the pieces started falling into place. What if the infection could be stopped with a specific compound, something linked to the chemicals in the ocean? She wasn't sure what that would look like, but she had to find a way to test it. The fate of the survivors could depend on it. Time, however, is running out. While Jake organizes defense efforts, Anna scrambles to create something, anything that might offer a solution. Every day, more people fall ill. More people become infected. She can't afford to waste time, but every second spent in the lab trying to mix solutions could be one more second that someone else becomes a victim. Anna might just hold the key to stopping this nightmare, but can she unlock it before it's too late? Or will the infected beat her to it? You wouldn't expect a teenager of all people to be the calm in the storm, but somehow, Mason, rebellious, loud-mouthed, and always armed with his GoPro, has become a crucial member of the survival group. At first, he seemed like nothing more than an irritating distraction, more concerned with capturing footage of the chaos than actually contributing. But over time, it became clear there was more to this kid than his rough exterior and constant filming. Mason's bravery wasn't in the form of grand speeches or heroic actions. It was in the quiet moments, the ones when the group needed to stay focused, when the weight of the situation threatened to break them. He never hesitated to volunteer for dangerous tasks, whether it was going out to scavenge for supplies or taking point on security. And while most of the survivors were busy trying to stay alive, Mason was documenting it all. Every moment of fear, every tear, every angry exchange. But it wasn't just the camera that made him valuable. It was his ability to keep others grounded. He joked when it seemed like there was no reason to laugh, offered a quick wit when things got too tense, and perhaps most surprisingly, he had an uncanny ability to see patterns in the chaos, figuring out escape routes, weak spots in the infected's movements, things the older, more experienced members of the group had overlooked. In many ways, Mason was more than just a kid with a camera. He was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, human ingenuity and resilience can show up in the most unexpected places. But as the group inches closer to the pier, the question remains, will Mason's resourcefulness be enough to get them out alive, or will the chaos overwhelm them all? The plan was simple. Too simple, perhaps. Get to the pier, find a boat, escape Clearwater Beach. But as anyone could have predicted, nothing about this outbreak was simple. Jake, Anna, Mason, and the rest of the group had been preparing for hours, scavenging what little they could from the overrun town. Weapons, food, water, anything that could make the journey more bearable. But the route to the pier was a gamble, a deadly one. The streets between their refuge and the coastline were crawling with the infected, roaming in packs, driven by hunger, not reason. The last thing they needed was to run into a horde, but the closer they got, the more the air seemed thick with the scent of decay. The first few blocks were eerily quiet, almost too quiet. There were no screams, no growls, just the distant, haunting moans of the infected. Jake led the group with careful precision, checking every corner, every shadow. Mason was in the rear, his camera rolling, capturing every tense moment. His mind was focused not just on surviving, but on keeping everyone grounded. But even his bravado couldn't shake the dread that started creeping into his thoughts. The road ahead was blocked. A line of abandoned vehicles, some overturned, others rammed into each other in a failed attempt at a barricade. The group would have to find a way around, through alleys and side streets, if they wanted to avoid getting trapped. The dangers were mounting, but the real test was still ahead. The bridge. The closer they got, the more the infected seemed to move in sync. It was like they knew. They were waiting for them. And just when it seemed like the path to safety would open up, the unmistakable sounds of a horde flooded the streets ahead. The infected were closing in. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a race against time, against the odds, and against the madness that was now chasing them. As the group neared the pier, exhaustion and fear began to set in. But amid the tension, Anna, who had been tirelessly working to understand the infection, stumbled upon something that could change everything. Her theory, based on the research she had done earlier on the chemical spill, began to take shape. The infected, it seemed, had an aversion to water that had been treated with specific chemicals tied directly to the spill. It was a fragile hope, a possible lifeline in a sea of despair. If they could find a way to purify enough water and create a barrier using these chemicals, it might just be enough to push back the infected. It wasn't much, and Anna knew it. Just a sliver of a chance. But in a world where every step forward felt like it might be your last, that small spark of hope was enough to keep them moving. But the question remained. Could they find enough of the chemical in time to make a difference, or would it be another cruel illusion in a world that had already given up on hope? The answer was unclear, but one thing was certain: the clock was ticking. As the group huddled together near the edge of the beach, the last glimmer of hope rested on a single, daring move. The lab van. Abandoned on the outskirts of Clearwater Beach, it contained critical supplies, chemicals that could either help them fight off the infection or provide a means of escape. But getting to the van wouldn't be easy. The path was blocked, and every step felt like a gamble. Jake stood at the front, his mind racing. A former Marine, he had led them through some tough spots already. But this was different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about outsmarting a relentless enemy. "We move in 2 groups," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. "Anna, Mason, you're with me. The rest of you stay close and keep your eyes open." They moved quickly, cutting through alleyways, sticking to the shadows, trying to avoid the growing number of infected now flooding the streets. The plan was to retrieve the chemicals, get back to the others, and make a run for the pier where the boats waited. But something felt wrong. Too many infected were moving in, and the silence of the night was broken only by distant cries and the occasional shuffling of footsteps. As they neared the van, Mason caught sight of something that froze him in his tracks. A group of infected clumped together near the rear doors. They had been waiting for the survivors. Their eyes were vacant, but the hunger was unmistakable. "Stay low. Stay quiet," Jake ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "We wait for the right moment." The plan seemed simple enough. Take out the few stragglers, grab the supplies, and get out. But even the best laid plans are often undone by one moment of chaos. A sound, sharp and echoing, split the air. Someone, a desperate soul, it seemed, had made a break for it, drawing the attention of the horde. And just like that, everything unraveled. The infected turned, their rotting eyes locking onto the survivors. A scream broke the silence as the first of them lunged forward. What followed was pure madness, an all-out sprint toward the van. There was no time to waste. Jake pushed forward, slamming into the door of the van with everything he had, the others close behind. Anna, her face pale with fear but determined, scrambled inside and grabbed what they needed, the chemicals, finally in their hands. But just as the group turned to flee, the ground beneath them seemed to shake, more infected swarming from every direction. They were surrounded. The van became a trap, a cage they couldn't escape from. Jake's pulse quickened as he realized the true cost of this gamble. They had what they needed, but the price for it would be steep. The group fought back fiercely, but it was clear that they wouldn't be able to hold the line for long. The chaos, the desperation, it all felt like too much, too fast. Mason's voice rang out above the chaos. "We need to go, now!" And with that, they bolted, pushing through the throngs of the infected, using the limited ammo they had left. But it was becoming clear that survival might be a fleeting dream. The infected were faster than they'd anticipated, and the van had been their last hope for escape. The moment they reached the open street, the horizon seemed darker than ever. They had survived, but at what cost? And would it be enough to outrun the storm of death closing in around them? The survivors barely had time to breathe before the sky opened up, unleashing the fury of nature. The storm came in fast, too fast. What had been a calm, eerily quiet beach now turned into an uncontrollable nightmare. Winds howled like a living thing, ripping through what remained of the town and sending debris crashing through the streets. The air thickened with salt water, and the sky, once a dim blue, turned an unnatural shade of gray, almost as if nature itself had joined the fight. At first, the survivors thought they were simply caught in a typical coastal storm, but soon it became clear that this wasn't just any storm. The wind wasn't just pushing the sand, it was pushing something else, something far more sinister. "Get to higher ground!" Jake shouted over the deafening roar of the wind, his voice barely cutting through the storm. "Move! Move! Move!" But the storm wasn't the only danger. The rising tide brought with it a new nightmare. From the roiling waters, the unmistakable figures of the infected began to emerge. Twisted, waterlogged corpses clawing their way up the shore, their grotesque bodies half submerged in the water. As the storm intensified, so did the rise of the undead. now amplified by the fury of the sea. Anna looked out into the storm's heart, her breath caught in her throat. The infected, once slow and lumbering, were now emerging from the ocean in droves, their movements faster, more frantic. They didn't hesitate, didn't stop to breathe or think. They were driven purely by the instinct to feed. And now the beach was a battleground, wind, rain, and the unrelenting tide against them. "We need to find shelter," Anna screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the tempest. Mason, ever the observer, pointed in horror as one of the waterlogged zombies staggered toward them, dripping with salt water, its skin hanging from its bones. "We can't outrun that," Jake gritted his teeth, looking at the group. "We don't have a choice." With the water rising around their feet and the zombies advancing from both land and sea, the survivors were trapped in the eye of a storm that wasn't just nature's fury, but the full force of an apocalypse closing in. Every step they took felt like a race against time. A new kind of terror had arrived, one that didn't just threaten their lives, but their very humanity. Would the storm be their undoing? Or would it become the catalyst that pushed them to fight like never before? Only one thing was certain. The odds had just gotten even worse. The night was filled with a growing tension, a sense of something terrible just out of reach. Amidst the chaos, Mason had taken to filming everything. His GoPro, a strange comfort in the insanity unfolding around them. He was trying to document it all, trying to make sense of the madness. But what he captured tonight would shake them all to their core. They were on the move again, heading towards a safer location, when Mason's camera caught something that made him stop dead in his tracks. At first, it seemed like just another infected stumbling aimlessly along the beach, its grotesque form twisted and mindlessly lurching forward. But as the camera zoomed in, something unexpected happened. The infected, a middle-aged man, with what looked like a faded Hawaiian shirt hanging off his decaying body, hesitated. He paused, just for a moment, and in that brief second, Mason caught it. An eerie flicker of recognition in the man's eyes. It was like a momentary flash of humanity, something deep within struggling to break through the violence. Mason's heart skipped a beat. The infected weren't just mindless beasts. They had memories. He zoomed in closer, barely daring to breathe. The man's head tilted as though he recognized something. Someone. Maybe his own reflection in the broken glass of a store window. Or perhaps a long, forgotten fragment of his life. For a moment, he didn't lunge forward in his usual hunger. Instead, he stood there, swaying, his dead eyes locked on the horizon. Then, just as quickly, the moment passed. His body jolted back to its relentless pursuit, his hunger for flesh taking over. Mason's voice was barely a whisper as he spoke into the camera. It's like he remembered. Just for a second. Like there's something left, something human. The group froze as they watched. The world seemed to hold its breath. Anna, who had been quiet until now, looked at Mason with wide eyes. What does this mean? If the infected still have some trace of their past, can we cure them? Her voice wavered with a glimmer of hope, the first they'd had in days. But Jake's expression hardened. We don't have time for hope, Anna. We have to focus on surviving. He turned to the group, his tone sharp and commanding. We stay on the move. We can't afford distractions. But Mason couldn't shake the haunting image of that man. The confusion in his eyes, the brief return of something human. It felt like a clue, something vital they might have missed. But what did it mean? Were they all just monsters now, driven by hunger and rage? Or was there still a chance, no matter how slim, that humanity could find its way back? The sound of static on the radio was relentless. The survivors had gathered around, listening intently as the frequency crackled with urgent updates. The military's broadcasts had become more frequent, more desperate. It had been a mix of propaganda and cold orders, but this latest message was something entirely different. Something far darker. It was Jake who first recognized the message for what it was, a last-ditch effort to contain the chaos, to wipe the slate clean before the infection could spread beyond their shores. "The National Guard is here," the voice on the other end spoke, clipped and panicked. "In a matter of hours, Clearwater Beach will be incinerated. A full-scale napalm strike will be launched to neutralize the infected and prevent further spread of the virus." The words hit like a hammer to the chest. Anna's eyes widened in shock. "They're going to burn us all, aren't they?" Her voice cracked, the weight of the realization crushing her. Jake clenched his fists. He didn't need to hear more. He already knew what that meant. The military had taken their gloves off. They were planning to destroy everything. The survivors, the infected, the entire beach. There would be no evacuation, no escape. Just flames and smoke. "We have to move," Jake said quickly, shaking his head in disbelief. "We don't have time to wait for this to happen. We need to get out of here now." Mason's voice, full of panic, interrupted. "But what if we can't get away in time? What if we're already—" Jake shot him a hard look, cutting him off. "We don't have that luxury anymore. The only option now is to run. Fast." But Anna wasn't convinced. What about the others? What if there are survivors we haven't found yet? We can't just leave them. We have to warn them. Jake hesitated, torn between the duty to save those in their immediate group and the knowledge that the napalm strike would wipe everything out in minutes. It was a decision no one should have to make. The radio crackled again, the voice of the officer on the other end filled with dread. "The strike will occur at 0400 hours. I repeat, 0400 hours. It's your last chance to get out." Jake turned to face the group, his face set in grim determination. "We can't fight this. We either run and make it out alive, or we stay and risk everything. You have 5 minutes to decide. Move now, or we're all dead." The clock was ticking, the flames were coming, and every second they hesitated might be their last. As the survivors took their first steps toward the exit, their minds were heavy with the impossible choices that lay before them. Time was running out, napalm was coming, and they had no idea if they'd make it to safety. But the thought gnawed at them all. What if there were others still out there? What if they could save someone else? Anna gripped her radio tightly, the transmission still crackling with static. She had an idea, a last-ditch plan, but it was risky. It would require them to split up, to gamble with their lives, for a chance to reach anyone who might still be out there. "We can still warn them," she said, looking at the group, her face determined. "The broadcast system at the marina. It's still working. If we can get to it, we can send a message to anyone nearby. We can warn them about the strike and give them a chance." Mason looked skeptical. "You want to stop the broadcast? With napalm coming down? Are you serious?" Jake's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple, Mason. We know there are other survivors out there. This could be their only chance." Anna's eyes were filled with a mix of hope and desperation. "If we don't do this, we might be condemning more people to die without a warning. They deserve to know." But the clock was ticking, and the storm of fire was closing in. The decision weighed heavily on Jake. He had never imagined they'd be forced to choose between survival and compassion. 5 minutes, Jake said, his voice low and resolute. "We make it to the marina and send the message. But after that, we run. No hesitation." The group nodded, knowing that the clock was ticking on both fronts. The future of the survivors, both the ones here and the ones still out there, hung in the balance. Would they fight for humanity's last chance? Or would they save themselves and leave everyone else behind? The path ahead was clear, but whether they'd make it in time was another question entirely. The tension was unbearable. Seconds stretched into minutes as the survivors stood, frozen, in the darkened hall of the marina's radio room. The storm outside raged like a living thing, the wind howling, crashing waves slamming against the shore. In the distance, the faint but unmistakable sound of zombies, shuffling closer, their moans growing louder. Time was not their ally. Anna had her hands trembling over the broadcast system, the equipment eerily silent except for the soft hum of the emergency generator in the corner. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the desperation of the moment. She looked at Jake, who stood beside her, his jaw clenched, determination burning in his eyes. They knew this could be their last chance, not just to save themselves, but to save everyone still alive out there. Jake's voice cut through the silence. "We have to act now. If we wait any longer, it's over. You ready?" Anna nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. "It's not just a broadcast, Jake. It's our last hope. If we get this wrong..." "We won't," Jake interrupted. "We can't afford to. Now get to it." Anna took a deep breath and pressed the button to begin the transmission. The radio crackled to life, the same urgent static that had haunted them for hours. She adjusted the dials, her hands moving almost mechanically, and then, with a deep breath, she spoke into the microphone. "This is Clearwater Beach emergency broadcast. Attention all survivors. The National Guard's napalm strike is scheduled for 0400 hours. Evacuation is no longer possible. You must leave the beach immediately or face incineration. We repeat, leave now. There is a safe zone on the northern end of the city. Head west. Move quickly. This is your last chance." The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. There was no time to waste. They could only hope that someone, anyone, was out there, listening, waiting for a lifeline. But even as Anna spoke, she could feel the ground beneath her shifting. The radio was a small beacon in the storm, but it was fragile. They had no idea how far the signal would travel, or whether it would even reach anyone before the strike hit. The truth was, this broadcast was just as much a gamble as anything else. But it was all they had. Jake's hand rested on her shoulder for a moment, the briefest of touches. It was a silent reassurance. He was with her in this moment. He knew, as much as she did, that this could be the turning point, or the end. As the broadcast ended, a moment of silence followed. Then, just as they feared, a distant roar of infected could be heard approaching. The group needed to move fast. There was no time for relief, no time for hope, just the cruel ticking of the clock. "Let's go," Jake said, his voice sharp with urgency. "Get to the marina. We're not done yet." But Anna couldn't shake the thought of what lay ahead. They had given their message, but would anyone hear it? Or was it too late for anyone else to survive? The storm outside intensified, and as the group moved, shadows of the undead seemed to stretch further along the beach like dark fingers reaching for them. They had made their choice. Now they had to pray that someone out there would find it in time. The group had made it to the marina. There was no turning back now. The boat was waiting, the water dark and churning, but it was their only escape. But just as they reached the docks, the sound of distant shrieks cut through the storm. Infected, dozens of them, were closing in too fast. Jake stood at the front of the group, his face grim, eyes scanning the chaos as the others hurried onto the boat. His grip tightened on his rifle, the weight of the decision sinking in. They couldn't all make it out, not without sacrificing someone. And Jake knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that it had to be him. Anna looked back, her eyes wide with terror, as she caught sight of Jake standing in the open, watching the oncoming horde. "Jake, get on the boat, now!" He shook his head, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing at him. "You need to go, Anna. Get them out of here. I'll hold them off." "No," Anna protested, her voice breaking. "I won't leave you." Jake's expression softened, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. He wasn't afraid, not of dying, but of leaving Anna and the others behind. He had to make sure they survived. He had to give them a chance, even if it meant his own death. "Anna," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you don't get it. If I don't hold them off, none of you make it. Go, please." Anna's eyes were filled with tears, but there was no time to argue. She saw the determination in his eyes, the same fire that had led them through so many impossible situations. He was giving everything for them, and there was nothing left to say. With a last glance, she turned and climbed aboard the boat, urging the others to start the engine. The sound of the motor roaring to life was drowned out by the growls and snarls of the infected, already closing in on Jake's position. Jake turned to face the oncoming swarm, his rifle raised, his resolve unshaken. He fired one shot after another, picking off the infected as they rushed towards him. But they kept coming, relentless, their numbers overwhelming. Each bullet that tore through the air seemed to slow them down for a moment, but it wasn't enough. There were too many. He knew the end was near. The boat was moving now, slipping away, but he couldn't turn back. He had made the decision. His sacrifice was the only way to ensure they had a chance to escape. Jake's heart pounded as the first infected reached him, their snarls deafening. He fired one last shot, a cry of defiance and desperation, ringing through the storm. And then he was surrounded, the weight of the horde pulling him down. As the boat sped away, Anna looked back for just a moment. She saw Jake, his form fading into the chaos, his sacrifice echoing in her mind. She wanted to scream, to beg for him to run, to make it out alive. But it was too late. The storm roared, the infected moaned, and Jake's final stand became a memory, the price of survival. And though the group had made it out, the loss was too great. Would they ever be able to forgive themselves? Would they ever find peace in the wake of this devastation? For now, all they could do was move forward, knowing that their survival had come at the cost of the one person who had given everything for them. Jake's sacrifice wasn't just the end of a life. It was the beginning of a new fight, a fight to survive, to rebuild, and to honor those who had fallen in the struggle. The storm had subsided, but the tension in the air was palpable. The survivors gathered at the marina had barely escaped the chaos of the beach. They were exhausted, bruised, and haunted by the loss of those they'd left behind. But there was no time to mourn. The fight for survival was far from over. Anna and Jake huddled near the radio station's transmitter, their faces drawn with the weight of the responsibility. Their broadcast had been a fragile hope for those still out there, but now they had a new message to send, one that would carry the truth of what had happened and the urgent need for anyone still alive to stay vigilant. Anna's hands hovered over the controls. She had the power to send the world a message, a lifeline for anyone who might be listening. She exhaled sharply, the words heavy on her lips. This wasn't just a broadcast, it was a warning. A final plea. Attention, she began, her voice steady but filled with the weight of the moment. This is Clearwater Beach emergency transmission. We repeat, this is Clearwater Beach. If you are receiving this message, you are still alive, but your survival depends on one thing. Avoid the infected at all costs. They are relentless. They are everywhere, and they are spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Do not engage them. Do not take chances. If you are near the water, stay far away. Do not trust anyone unless they've verified their status. The sound of the transmission crackled, and for a brief moment, Anna thought she heard a distant scream, a haunting reminder of the danger that lingered. She continued, her voice unwavering, despite the rising dread in her chest. The government's quarantine efforts have failed. The infection is too widespread. The only chance for survival is to keep moving. Do not stay in one place for too long. If you have supplies, use them sparingly. The virus is airborne, and we still don't know the full extent of its capabilities. Protect yourself at all costs. If you find other survivors, trust no one. A silence fell over the group as the transmission played out. It was a message of despair wrapped in a thin veil of hope, but there was no way around it. This was the new reality. The fight for survival wasn't just about fighting the infected. It was about staying one step ahead, always. We cannot promise you safety, Anna added, her voice faltering ever so slightly. But we can promise that you are not alone. And if you're hearing this, you are not forgotten. Stay vigilant. Stay alive. Clearwater Beach is lost, but you... She paused, gathering strength. You still have a chance. She shut off the transmission, and the room fell into an eerie quiet. But the weight of her words hung heavy in the air. The survivors knew that what they had just sent out might be the only chance someone else had to escape. But who, if anyone, would hear it? And would it be enough? As the radio broadcast ended, a brief sense of relief washed over the survivors. But Anna, always alert, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Her eyes scanned the horizon beyond the marina, where the ocean stretched dark and endless. The storm had passed, but there was no peace, only a heavy, unsettling quiet. It was then that she saw it, just beyond the waves, barely visible in the dying light of the storm. A ship. At first she thought it was just debris, caught in the aftermath of the storm, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized that it was far too large to be a piece of wreckage. The ship was drifting toward the mainland, its massive hull barely visible through the fog. Its outline was unmistakable, an old cruise ship, abandoned and eerily still. It wasn't moving under its own power. The sight sent a shiver down Anna's spine. She grabbed Jake's arm, pulling him to her side. "Look," she whispered, her voice tense with a mix of fear and confusion. "That ship is coming straight toward us." Jake squinted against the fog, his brow furrowing. "Is it?" He stopped mid-sentence, realizing the truth. "It's abandoned, isn't it?" Anna nodded, her mind racing. "It's a cruise ship. But who's on board? Why is it here?" Jake's gaze turned back to the water, his face darkening. "If it's coming toward us, that means the infection is spreading. But there's something else. Why would it come this way? What's on that ship?" The implications were chilling. If the ship had been abandoned, it could only mean one thing. Whatever had happened there had been bad enough to leave the vessel adrift. But if it had somehow found its way to this part of the coast, it could bring with it a whole new wave of horrors, a fresh outbreak. Anna's voice shook slightly. "If it's headed here, we need to know why. And if there's any chance we can stop it, we have to try." The ship loomed closer, its shadow growing darker against the pale sky. The survivors were left with a choice: investigate and risk their lives even further, or abandon the boat and hope to outrun whatever nightmare it brought with it. But deep down, they all knew the answer. There was no escaping it now. The ship was coming, and they had no way of knowing what awaited them aboard it. But one thing was certain. It was only a matter of time before they found out. The survivors, now huddled together at the edge of the marina, stared out at the approaching ship. The darkened horizon seemed to pulse with the threat of the unknown, each passing second a countdown to a new horror. But even as they prepared to make their next move, there was no denying the uncertainty that weighed heavy on their hearts. Had they truly escaped the worst of it? Or was this just the beginning? Anna and Jake exchanged a look, their faces a mix of exhaustion and grim resolve. The broadcast had been sent, the warning given, yet the world beyond the marina was still shrouded in chaos, its future uncertain, and as the abandoned cruise ship crept closer, they knew that whatever lay ahead would be worse than anything they had faced before. Was this the end of their story, or merely a chapter in a far darker tale? The survivors had made it this far, but the terror of what was to come was growing. The zombies, the storms, the isolation, they were only the beginning. What horrors awaited them as the ship drew nearer? What new threats had it brought with it? One thing was clear: they couldn't outrun what was coming. They could only face it together and hope that in the end, they'd be able to fight for their survival, no matter what horrors the future held. The ship was almost upon them, and in that moment, as they steeled themselves for whatever came next, they realized something they had known all along. Survival wasn't about escaping death. It was about facing the unknown and finding the strength to keep fighting. The radio had warned the world, but who would heed it? And would it be enough to save anyone at all? As the darkness swallowed the horizon, they could only wait for the answer. If you've listened to this radio broadcast all the way to the end, thank you for joining us. Your support means everything to us. To help us continue bringing you immersive and engaging broadcasts like this on a daily basis, consider joining our channel by clicking on the Join button. Stay connected with us for daily video updates and be part of our growing community by subscribing to our channel. If you have any suggestions or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment box below. And if you enjoyed this broadcast, please don't forget to like and share this video. Your support helps us reach more listeners and keeps us motivated to bring you the best content every day. Stay safe, stay informed, and until next time, thank you for being with us.